you'll invite me back, and I'll be able to tell you specific findings from the study. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lerner. Please welcome Dr. Richardson.
Hi. Thank you for coming. You guys all must be a very important group because of the research that I'm going to be sharing with you. It's the first time much of it has been shared with a public audience. So kudos to you again. My name's Amy Richardson. I'm with the RAND Corporation. I'm going to share with you some of the research that we've been doing over the last couple of years for the Office of the Secretary of the Army Manpower and Reserve Affairs, Assistant Secretary of the Army Manpower and Reserve Affairs. And we've been looking at the effects of parental deployment on children's academic progress and behavioral health challenges. Let me first give you a very brief look at our research and our findings, and then I'm going to go back and fill in some of the details. For this research, we approached this question of the effect of deployment on kids. Next slide, please. In a couple of different ways. We looked quantitatively at the relationship between parental deployment and the individual child's achievement for elementary, middle, and high school kids. We found that children whose parents have been deployed for 19 months or more cumulatively since 2001 have moderately lower achievement scores than children whose parents have been deployed less or not at all. We also approached this question qualitatively. We interviewed school teachers and other administrators, counselors, as well as behavioral health specialists to identify some of the unique challenges that children face when their parents are deployed, the academic challenges and the behavioral health challenges that they face. From this analysis of the challenges that they face, we've made a number of recommendations. A couple of them that we've made to support kids academically is to provide children with additional resources to support students with their schoolwork, and to improve the flow of information to schools about which children are military and about their deployments, parents' deployment cycle, and how schools can better support the needs of these children and help those families access services that are available to the children. To support the children in their behavioral health, we recommend that the Army focus on ways to increase behavioral health capacity, both within the Army and also looking to outside services and sources of support. And also to improve programs for prevention, screening, and early identification that can identify the behavioral health challenges that students are facing before they become more significant. So that's just kind of a very thumbnail sketch of what I'm going to talk about today, and I'll go back and fill some of the blanks. Next slide, one more, please. So the quantitative research that we did was a very large, multi-state, multi-year, individual level study. What we did was we matched the parent's deployment record to the child's academic achievement scores for public school children in elementary, middle, and high school. And we did this for kids in North Carolina and in Washington State from 2002 to 2008. By using this methodology, our results, our sample, reflect the majority of school-age Army dependents in these two states, because we looked at public school kids. And we are also, because we use this methodology, able to look at the active component kids as well as the reserve component kids. As I said, next slide, please. We found that children whose parents had deployed a cumulative amount of time of 19 months or more since 2002 have moderately lower, but statistically different, achievement scores from those kids whose parents have deployed less or not at all. And what was remarkable was that this relationship is very stable across a number of different dimensions. So it didn't matter how many times the parent had deployed within those 19 months or more. It also didn't matter which state you were looking at. We saw the similar results in North Carolina and in Washington. We looked at reading and we looked at math, and the results were similar. We also looked at a number of different characteristics of the soldier to see if some kids were having a tougher time than some of the others. So we looked at the differences between children of enlisted soldiers and officers, at those who were families in the active component and in the reserve component. We looked at kids whose parents were of different levels of seniority in the Army, and kids whose parents were male or female. And in all cases, there was no significant difference in the response that the kid had to deployment based on those characteristics of the soldier. Similarly, we looked at characteristics of the child. We looked at, do boys respond differently than girls? Do elementary, middle, and high school children respond differently? And we found no statistically significant differences. And finally, we looked at over time. Is the reaction that kids are having in the later years different than what we had seen in the earlier years? And we didn't find statistically significant differences. Next slide. We also interviewed teachers, counselors, and administrators to try to help us understand a little bit more effectively the specific challenges that the kids who are struggling with deployment are facing. For this, we interviewed elementary, middle, and high school teachers, counselors, and administrators to understand the struggles of the active component kids. We conducted those interviews in person at schools that were close or on Army posts in 2 different states. And to look at the Reserve and National Guard kids, we conducted those interviews by phone. That research was done in March through August 2008. It's important to recognize the timing on this because a lot has changed since then, but our research was begun at that point. We also interviewed a number of behavioral health specialists and providers by phone from September of last year to May of this year. What we found from our interviews, which will be no surprise to the audience, is that many children and families are coping well with deployment, but some are struggling with a range of deployment-related issues that can impact a child's academic success. In light of this, many of the school staff wanted more information on the children that they're serving. They wanted information about which kids were military and the deployment status of their parents so that they can anticipate challenges that the children might face and address them in a preventative way. And they wanted more information about how to help the families and children themselves and how to refer them to other services. We also found that children are facing some behavioral health challenges that can impact their academic success. And for many of the children, resiliency seemed to be waning. Some of the children, you could identify the challenges that they were having, you could trace those back to the parents who were struggling with deployment, and that would cascade back onto the kids. And finally, some students are feeling isolated, particularly those in the reserve component, who are experiencing parental deployment and not being able to share this experience with other youth. Next, oh, sorry, we're not on the right slide. Next slide. Next slide. Okay. We also found a number of barriers that children and families are facing in addressing behavioral health needs. First, there are too few providers with training in child and adolescent health, and particularly with military children. Now, this is a national shortage as well. It's nothing specific to the Army, but it is a challenge that the Army's facing. In addition, some providers, especially those that are newer to TRICARE, have little grounding in military culture. They lack the experience of addressing the problems that are particular to the military and to deployment. We also found that the availability of prevention, screening, and early intervention varies widely. There's been some improvement nationally on this, and you've heard about some pilot programs that are being done in the Army, but the availability of these services is variable and more attention is needed. The school staff members also indicated that they needed more information about how to connect students and families to behavioral health services. And finally, military family life consultants, which are behavioral health consultants that go into the schools, provide important support to schools, students, families, but the monitoring and the evaluation of that program could be improved. We have a few recommendations that I'm going to share with you. We have more in our report. First, to address the student academic challenges, we recommend that the Army provide additional resources to support students with their schoolwork. There's a lot that the Army is doing now. As I said, this research came out a while ago, and we've been working collaboratively with the Army on this, and they've already begun to implement some of these recommendations. But the additional resources could be after-school resources, online resources. These resources might be military-sponsored or military-supported, or they could just be volunteer efforts that the Army would encourage. There are a number of models out there to support high-mobility populations, such as immigrant children, and these might be a useful reference for the Army to develop other models to support children academically as they move or when they're out of school for parental leave. Second, and there are some rare cases where the parents are unresponsive to their child's struggle, and the teachers and counselors that we spoke with would like procedures for the schools to seek Army support to engage those unresponsive parents in those rare cases. Some formalized approach with some decision rules so that they can feel empowered to help the kids most in need. To improve the flow of information to schools, we recommend that the Army develop methods to inform schools about which children are military and about parental deployment. This might be something simple as developing a form that schools could pass out to children at the beginning of the school year. The Army could encourage its use. It would be a voluntary form. Ideally, in the long run, it would be great if the military were able to feed information to the schools about the parents' deployment cycle, about parental leave, et cetera, so that the schools are informed about the deployment status of the child's parent. We also recommend that the Army provide improve the way that schools counselors can access information on military support and services. Right now, there's a number of multiple websites that are available that are hard to navigate for teachers and counselors who aren't familiar with the military. So we recommend kind of a one-stop shop central resource that's specifically tailored to teachers and administrators who are teachers and counselors who are supporting military children. We also recommend that the Army improve the presence of the school liaison officers and strive for a more collaborative relationship between the SLOs and the school staff, because they can be an important resource. Here's another way where the Army has actually added the number of SLOs since we originally made this recommendation, so some progress is being made already. We recommend the Army also develop performance metrics for the SLOs and streamline the knowledge transfer from the SLOs to the schools. To address the insufficient supply of behavioral health providers for students, we recommend that the Army continue to build psychological and behavioral health service capacity. This is already an issue that's very top of mind to the Army. They're working hard to do this. It's a very difficult challenge because there's also a national shortage. But steps that could be taken and could continue to be taken are to increase subspecialty pay and other support benefits available to people interested in a career in behavioral health, particularly for children and adolescents. And then maybe implement some sort of a program like a troops to counselors model. We also recommend that the Army increase the number of free community-based mental health resources that are targeted to military families. The cost of services for families can be a challenge, and so encouraging other community-based resources for families would help address that. This might be done through grant funding or a cooperative arrangement. Third, to expand models for improving access to harder-to-reach youth populations, particularly Reserve Guard. One way that this could be done is through telepsychiatry. The Army is already doing this, has a pilot program in Fort Bragg and in Fort Drum, and it's been used successfully among other populations to access hard-to-reach populations. To improve the understanding of military culture, we recommend that the Army develop rapid training programs on military culture and the potential impacts of deployment. These rapid training modules have been developed for other issues like cultural sensitivity. The Army could develop rapid training modules on military culture as well. To improve the availability of prevention, screening, and early intervention, we recommend the enhanced integration of behavioral health into the primary care setting. We already heard a little bit about some pilot programs that the Army is doing at Madigan to support this, but the idea here is to incentivize either co-location of behavioral health and primary care services, or to coordinate those services. You might have behavioral health screening technologies available in primary care locations, and building capacity with primary care to address behavioral health issues. To improve the evaluation and monitoring of the MFLIC program, we recommend that the Army recognize that the outcomes, that it's important to maintain the outside nature of the MFLICs. They're not part of the school system, and that's important, but the Army could develop some aggregate measures that don't impede that, but could help evaluate the MFLIC program. And then finally, to address the social isolation of the reserve component families, the Army could organize more frequent and regular regional, statewide social events. These already go on a lot, but have them be more frequent and regular so that people can plan around them, and to provide travel compensation, because that can be a barrier to people attending. And then to develop a social networking site, particularly for military youth, that could host instant messaging chat rooms. It could have links to other sites. It can, and the Army would need to consider how to monitor this effectively, but that's been done in other avenues as well. This is all part of a large report, and we've been working on this for a couple of years, so I've tried to distill it in 15 minutes. But if you want information, come up and ask me afterwards. Give me your contact information, and I can send you a copy of the report, or just send me an email.
Thank you, Dr. Richardson. And now we'll please welcome Dr. Hubner.
Well, good morning. Before I start, I want to say that it's always humbling to be in this audience because of the amazing work that you do and the sacrifices that your families have made. So I want to say thank you to you and just recognize that and give yourselves a hand, because this is a big deal. Yeah. All right, well, I'm going to mix this up a little bit and talk to you about adolescent adjustment and parent deployment, but our studies are a little bit different. And what I'm going to try to do at the end is then pull that together for you, and what does that mean as parenting and how we support parents and spouses. So here we go. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk about a couple of different studies that we've done. The funding sources are listed, so we couldn't have done this without support from various organizations. Next slide. Here's the two studies, and I'm going to give you the data background, but then I'm going to give you words from young people. So our study is unique in that for the first time in this conflict, we went to the young people themselves. So you've heard a lot of studies where it's been, we've talked to parents, we've talked to teachers, we've talked to other folks. We went to the adolescents because they don't really have a voice in telling us what's going on with them. We make a lot of assumptions about what's happening, but adolescence is unique in that they cannot tell us stuff. Right? They're pretty good at hiding information from parents or trying to make everybody else feel better. So this was a chance for them to have a voice. So the first study that we did was back in 2004, and don't worry about the details. That is pretty smushy, isn't it? But essentially what I want you to know is 2004, we partnered with the National Military Family Association at their Operation Purple camps. And this was fairly early on in their process. And so what we did was talk to kids as part of that camp structure in various states. Now, have any of you ever had a kid in camp? Yeah, right? You, okay, right. Have to be sort of organized to get your kid into camp, right? Even if it's free, and both of the camp settings is where we collected our data. But I want to point out that these kids that are at these camps are probably higher functioning or from higher functioning families, just inherent of the process of getting your kid organized, getting the physical done, all of the stuff that you have to do, right? Even though it's free, these camps were free. So the data that I'm going to present, I'm suggesting are probably a little underestimates of what's actually happening, so just sort of keep that in mind as full disclosure. So kids came from all different, okay, back up one? Yeah, thank you. Different services, Guard, Reserve, 2004. 2004, the question was really about what's this deployment like for you? What's it like to have a parent deployed? We went back 4 years later, different venues, still camps, but this time it was Operation Military Kids. Same sorts of questions, but now we added the caveat of what's it like to have multiple deployments. And you've got to remember that some of these kids, this is all that they know or remember in adolescence, because when they were younger, their parent wasn't deployed, or they're 12 or 13, 14. This is life as they know it. So keep that in mind. Okay, next slide, please. Thanks. Brief model. We needed a way to structure what we were looking for. And our belief and this theory of adjustment talks about what predicts good adjustment, and that's really what we're all trying to do, right? Make the best outcomes for families that are making such a tremendous sacrifice. So in this model, we look at what the stressor is. For our study, it was deployment and multiple deployment and all that stuff that's going on in adolescence, right? Remember back to your own adolescence, you might want to block it out, it's okay, but lots of stuff going on, right, that's just normative. The second area is resources, and again, that's what we're here for. You all are doing amazing formal support sorts of things, lots of programs, lots of supports. Also those informal supports, which are the connections that are made, and isn't that the point of the formal connections, is to hook people up? You know, it's about the relationship, silly, right? That's what it's about. The third factor is cognition. We know that the way people make sense of any scenario is the story they tell themselves about it. So people can be in the exact same scenario, have very different outcomes because it all came down to what the story was that they told themselves about what was happening. So that's what we wanted to look at with these folks. And then our measures of adjustment, we looked at mental health, depression, and family environment. So that's kind of the model to think about. Okay, next. I wanted to put this in case I didn't get to it. Here's the take home, all right? One, shocking, deployment is stressful. Thank you, I'll go home now. For young people and their families. But again, adaptation can be positive or negative. I mean, we need a certain amount of stress to function, right? If I didn't think I was going to be late for the metro, I wouldn't have gotten out of bed on time to get here. So a little stress is good. But what is it? So what does that X factor depend on? That's what we're interested in. So we know we have stress, we know we have all this stuff, but what makes the difference? And we found, again, mental health, depression, and coping was one factor. The types of formal and informal supports and the meaning that they made were the big things. Okay, next slide, please. This, again, I know you can't see the little ones. This is the only quantitative thing I'm going to show you. We took the kids and divided them into those that seem to be coping really well and those that seem to be having a hard time. And I can give you more information about that later. But one of them, we looked at, we had a measure of depression, a child depression inventory. And on the left side, on the left side of the left, you're out the door, no, okay, it's low depression, the kids that had lower levels of depression on the left, we also looked at their family climate. And what you see from just the box is the range of scores, but the take home from that box is that those kids that had lower depression scores had a much more coherent family environment, had a much more positive family environment from their perception. So this isn't what the parents or the teachers or somebody else was telling us. This is what the young people told us. Versus those on the other end of the continuum that had high depression or higher scores of depression, their family climate was a little bit lower. You can see the difference where that main line in the boxes are. On the other side, we looked at parental attachment. We looked at an indicator of child and parent attachment. And you see the same sort of finding. Those that had a more secure attachment on the left, lower depression, less secure attachment, a little bit higher depression, and those were on the outsides. Okay, so that's, it kind of gives you a picture of it's all a system. We can't look at any of this stuff independently. What happens in the family happens to the kids. What's happening in the communities happens to the families. You know, it goes all the way through. Okay, so next slide. What I want to do now is give you, and I had to be very careful about how I pulled this out because usually I do like an hour and a half or 2 hours on this. I want to give you a flavor of what the young people said in their own words because this was qualitative data. So as an example of the stressor event, this young person said, I think he's in the retired reserves, but I think he's going to go back. Like they're going to say, oh yeah, just before you retire, oh yeah, you're going to go back. And this is an important point because it echoes some of the work that Patricia Lester has done at UCLA and looking at the integration, the reintegration. It's not easy, but the spousal unit recovers quicker. Not to say that it's easy. I don't want to put that out there. But the child system has a lag time. And this sort of describes that. What the young people talked to us about was this hypervigilance about, I know he's going to go back. And even though you tell me he's home now or mom's home now, he could go back, even if he's retired. And they're not wrong. Right? Young people, this is not completely out of the possibility. So they're very stealthy at trying to read the indicators of, is this really going to be for now, or is this just my parent is home for a while and they're going to go again? So that has all sorts of implications for what's going on physiologically with them. Other studies have actually demonstrated heightened PTSD arousal in the adolescent system when they look at cortisone levels and all of those sorts of things. So this is kind of a big deal. So that's an example of the stressor. Next slide. Now I'm skipping to the end of the model because the meat is in the middle, right? The meat's in the middle of the sandwich. Adjustment. This young person said, I can't go to sleep because they are up and doing something and you can't you're thinking about what they're doing. So this, again, implications for why are their grades going down? Well, they can't really focus. They've got a lot on their mind. They're really concerned about what's happening. The next one says, it's just a lot more stress on her, and she's talking about her mom in this scenario. Like, she holds her stress up pretty well, but she's just like, if me and my sister are acting up, she gets mad a lot easier. So the young person's seeing the impact that stress is having on the parent. Side note, the analyses that we do with qualitative analysis actually let us do word counts and different sorts of things. So for fun, I wanted to see how many times young people said like. Right? So in that first sample, it was 1,967 times. Just so you know that these are really their words, we didn't edit that out. I might stumble, but there you have it. Okay, so the last one is that idea of reintegration, and what's that like for young people? Well, when my dad left, everything's going one way, and when he comes back, he's starting out right where he left off. So there's just a big clash, and that starts lots of problems. Like, he forgets that he's been gone for like a year. So he thinks we're a lot younger, and while he was gone, we matured a lot over the year. And he's still trying to treat us the way we were treated a year ago, right? Yeah, and so again, I know I need to push along, but I want to make the point that there's a whole bunch of stuff systemically that's happening at the same time during reintegration. It's not just that the child has changed. I mean, think about that growth that happens, you know, the young person, you leave them over the summer, you come back in the fall, and they're, you know, there's that piece. The service members got stuff going on, right? They're not just, woo, I'm home. Right? There's stuff going on in the spousal unit too. So we're trying to balance all of these things, and we can't, I think we do a disservice when we try to target just one piece of that puzzle without keeping the big picture in mind. So that's adjustment. Next slide. So now what we know is the difference happens in that B and C part, the resources that they have and the meaning that they make, which as a researcher says, that's where we've got our lever. That's where we can make some differences. So resources and support. This is an idea of informal support. This young person said, I've got one friend that will actually talk about it because she has a brother being deployed soon, but all the rest of my friends don't. It sort of makes them uncomfortable for me to talk about it, and that makes me uncomfortable too. So she shuts down. This young woman talked about, I just don't talk about it because people can't tolerate it. So what does she look like to everybody else? She's doing fine. She doesn't talk about it. She must be fine. But she just learned that I don't stay connected to my friends if I bring this up, so I'm not going to bring it up. Next one, formal support. I feel like my teachers are more understanding and, you know, more apt to give me an extension on my homework because they know about my family. Because I had this one teacher whose dad was deployed and he died while he was over there. And, you know, she just took me under her wing and was like my counselor throughout the rest of the year. So